Under the dim gray light of occupied Poland, 1943, a hospital stood quietly at the edge of the forest near Krakow, white on the outside, hollow on the inside. The war had turned its walls into something far colder than a place of healing. Wounded soldiers came in by the dozens each day, the uniforms of the Wehrmacht trailing mud and silence through the hallways. And among the nurses who moved between the cots and morphine lamps, there was one whose calm was not what it seemed. Her name was never spoken loudly, not out of fear, but reverence. To most, she was simply the nurse with the steady hands. No one knew that those same hands were writing names at night, names of the condemned, hidden beneath the pages of false medical reports. She had been trained long before the war, gentle, precise, her penmanship elegant enough to forge any official document. When the SS arrived to inspect the hospital's orderliness, she greeted them as though nothing could break her composure. They saw in her only obedience, but she saw everything, every transfer order, every train manifest, every quiet disappearance in the nearby woods. And she began, in small, deliberate ways, to interfere. A wrong blood type here, a delayed report there, a fever note falsified to buy a patient another day. It started with one man, a Polish teacher marked for relocation. She switched his chart with that of a German deserter who had died the night before. The SS took the wrong body. The teacher woke the next day to a new identity and a new life. From that moment, she understood her role wasn't just to heal wounds. It was to blur the lines between life and death, paperwork and salvation. But with every forged line, the noose drew tighter. In the sterile halls, whispers began to surface. Someone was tampering with the Reich's records. Someone in the hospital was defying the system. The SS captain assigned to oversee medical compliance, a man named Kruger, began to visit more often. His boots echoed like a metronome of suspicion. He asked simple questions, smiled too easily. He had the eyes of someone who enjoyed cornering truth. And yet, the nurse continued. Night after night, the candlelight of her small office flickered behind the frosted window, its shadow steady, rhythmic, as if she were simply completing reports. In reality, she was orchestrating the slow disappearance of people who should have vanished forever. Every new file was a gamble, every signature a weapon disguised as ink. The other nurses began to notice the tension that lingered in the air after the SS left. The head physician, a man broken long ago by the weight of survival, avoided looking at her altogether. He knew what she was doing, and he said nothing. Perhaps he thought silence would protect them all, or perhaps he simply admired her courage more than he feared the consequences. Outside, the sound of trains haunted the evenings. Inside, the hospital breathed in, whispers, words like transfer, infection, clearance, all clinical terms, all carrying another meaning. And somewhere between the sterile sheets and the stifled cries, the nurse built her own quiet resistance. But the story did not begin with bravery. It began with loss. 2 years before, her younger sister had been taken, accused of helping partisans. There had been no trial, no record, only an empty bed and the echo of boots fading down the corridor. That absence became the fuel behind every risk she took. She would not save her sister, but she could save others, one falsified document at a time. What no one in the hospital yet realized was that this web of mercy she was weaving was growing too wide to hide. Kruger had begun to notice discrepancies. The wrong name on a transport list, a mismatched date on a certificate. He didn't have proof yet, but he didn't need it. He had intuition and an interest in breaking people slowly. As the winter deepened, her defiance began to draw attention from beyond the walls. Word had spread quietly among the underground resistance. A nurse in Krakow could make people disappear from the Reich's system. Couriers came disguised as patients, doctors as smugglers, priests as orderlies. And the nurses' hands, once meant only for healing, now decided who lived under false names and who would die under real ones. At night, she would sit by the single candle in her quarters, listening to the wind scrape against the window. She wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid of being caught too early, before she could finish what she'd started. Each forged document carried the same silent prayer. Let this one reach safety. Let them make it past the border. The walls of the hospital became both prison and sanctuary. She learned to read danger in the smallest things. A hesitation in Kruger's tone, an unfamiliar clerk at the records desk, a sealed envelope marked with the Reich's insignia. Every breath had to be measured. Every smile had to look genuine. And still, she pressed on, because somewhere beyond the forest, hidden under false names she had written, were dozens of lives she had rewritten, the remnants of her small rebellion against the machinery of death. She could not fight with guns or speeches, but she could fight with ink and time. And in a world ruled by fear, that made her the most dangerous kind of enemy, one who looked like she belonged. And that was how the quiet defiance began. The snow that winter did not fall softly. It came in sheets, sweeping across the fields like a slow, deliberate erasure. By January 1944, the hospital at the forest's edge had become an island of whispers. The wounded came from the Eastern Front now, men broken not only in body but in spirit. And the nurse, the one they called Frau Weiss by habit and fear, moved among them like a ghost that refused to vanish. To anyone watching, she was ordinary. The crisp folds of her house uniform, the steady tone in her reports, the way she nodded when the SS inspectors passed. But beneath the routine lay something more intricate, a pattern too careful to be coincidence. The false records she had crafted had saved nearly 30 lives since the autumn, but they had also begun to draw attention, quiet, bureaucratic attention. Files were being rechecked. The Gestapo office in Krakow had sent requests for clarifications that should never have mattered. And worst of all, Captain Kruger was returning more often than his rank required. He would walk into the hospital unannounced, his gloves immaculate, his tone falsely polite. He carried no clipboard, no documents, just questions, the kind that circled you, slow and patient, until the air itself felt thinner. "Tell me, Sister Weiss," he would say, tapping the corner of his cane against the tile. "How is it that so many of your patients recover just before they are scheduled for transport?" She would lower her eyes, a perfect imitation of submission. "The human body, Herr Hauptmann, is unpredictable. Some wish to live harder than others." He would watch her for a long time, as if listening not to her words, but to the heartbeat beneath them, before smiling and turning away. But she knew what that smile meant. It meant the clock was ticking. In the evenings, when the hospital quieted and the snow muted the world, she retreated to the records room. The light there was faint, just one bulb dangling above stacks of ledgers and personnel files, their edges curled with moisture. This was her battlefield. Here, she rewrote fates one letter at a time. She knew which numbers to alter, which clerks could be bribed, which lists traveled too slowly to be cross-checked. That night, she was not alone. From the corner of the records room, a voice whispered, "You shouldn't be here so late." It was Dr. Adler, the senior physician, a man who had once been respected in Berlin before the war reduced him to a shadow of himself. "I'm finishing the inventory," she replied without looking up. He stepped closer, his expression drawn tight. "Inventory doesn't require that much ink, sister." He glanced at the papers spread before her, medical charts, transport forms, and one name circled in red, Kamil Lewandowski. "This one's supposed to be transferred tomorrow," Adler said softly. She nodded. "He won't be." Adler's jaw tightened. You can't save them all. The captain is already suspicious. Her pen paused mid-stroke. Then let him be suspicious. Suspicion is slower than proof. Adler exhaled. You're playing with fire. She looked up at him for the first time that night. Doctor, fire is all we have left. Outside, the sound of an engine broke the silence, a convoy arriving under cover of darkness. The SS trucks carried new patients, or so the guard said, but the nurse knew better. Among the stretchers would be prisoners disguised as soldiers, men pulled from camps for medical experiments, their identities erased by orders that came stamped and sealed. As dawn approached, she stood by the gates, clipboard in hand, watching the doors of the first truck swing open. The stench of fuel mixed with cold air. Two medics carried out a man barely conscious, his face hidden beneath a stained blanket. She took one look at the trembling hand clutching the edge of the stretcher. Not a soldier's hand. No calluses, no uniform mark. Her pulse quickened. She looked to Kruger, who had arrived moments earlier, his breath fogging in the air. Another group from Tarnov, he said flatly. Special cases. You'll ensure they're examined and documented. Yes, Herr Hauptmann. And Sister Weiss. He paused, adjusting his gloves. This time, I'll be reviewing the records myself. Her throat tightened, but her face betrayed nothing. Of course. By noon, she had managed to isolate 3 of the prisoners among the wounded. Each had a tattooed number partially hidden under bandages, evidence that would condemn them instantly if seen. She replaced their intake forms with blank ones, listed them under new names, and assigned them to different wards. It was a delicate choreography of deception, every move rehearsed in her mind, every signature a quiet rebellion. But Kruger, as always, was watching. He appeared that afternoon in the corridor, standing by the doorway of Ward 7, flipping through a clipboard. Curious, he said softly. These 3, no prior medical records, no identification tags. He turned to her. How do you explain that? She met his gaze calmly. They were found without tags, Herr Hauptmann, possibly field replacements. He smiled faintly. Field replacements, without fields. A silence hung between them, taut, electric. The corridor seemed to shrink. She could hear her own heartbeat, steady but fast. Kruger leaned closer. You're a very capable woman, Sister Weiss. Capable people are rare in times like these. I admire that. His tone was not praise. It was a warning wrapped in courtesy. When he finally turned and walked away, she allowed herself a single breath. Just one. Then she returned to the ward, where one of the men she had hidden, the one called Camille, struggled to stay awake. You shouldn't move, she whispered, adjusting his bandage. His eyes fluttered open. Why help me? He murmured. Because someone once helped me, she said quietly. Now, rest. In the weeks that followed, Kruger's visits grew more frequent. He began to inspect the records at irregular hours. He questioned staff, searched supply rooms, even ordered random patients to be moved for reassessment. It was only a matter of time before he found something, and he did. One night, as the nurse reviewed the final manifest for an outgoing transport, the sound of boots echoed behind her. She turned. Kruger stood in the doorway, holding a file. This, he said, placing it on the desk, was found in your drawer. Care to explain? Her eyes flickered to the folder. It was one of her forged reports, one she thought she had burned. I don't recall leaving it there, she said, voice steady. Kruger studied her for a long moment, then opened the folder and read aloud. Patient 72B, unfit for transfer due to infection. Yet, according to Central Command, patient 72B was cleared 3 days earlier. He closed the file slowly. So, tell me, Sister Weiss, who is lying? You or the records in Berlin? She felt the weight of every heartbeat in her chest. "There must be an administrative error," she said, choosing her words carefully. "The forms travel slowly." Kruger's smile returned, thin, deliberate. "Yes, errors happen, especially when the same hands write both versions." He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her desk. "You're clever, but cleverness is only useful when it serves the right cause." He tapped the folder lightly, then turned to leave. "I'll be back tomorrow. Perhaps you'll remember more by then." When he left, she collapsed into her chair. Her mind raced. If he searched again, he'd find the others. The false ledgers, the coded names, everything. There was only one option left. She had to destroy the evidence before dawn. That night, the hospital burned with quiet light. In the records room, she tore out pages, one after another, feeding them to the small furnace behind the old supply shelf. The air filled with the smell of scorched paper. Names turned to ash, names of the living, the dead, the saved. Every page she burned was both a loss and a mercy. She didn't notice Adler enter until he spoke. "He'll know," he said softly. "If you burn them all, he'll know." She turned, eyes glistening in the firelight. "Then let him know. At least the proof will be gone." Adler shook his head. "You can't protect everyone." She looked at the flames, then at him. "I'm not trying to protect everyone. Just enough." At dawn, Kruger returned. The hospital smelled faintly of smoke, masked poorly by disinfectant. He walked the corridors slowly, his gloved hand brushing against the whitewashed walls, as if feeling for lies. When he entered the records room, the furnace was cold. The files were gone. Only a faint layer of ash dusted the floor. He crouched, rubbed the ashes between his fingers, and smiled faintly. "Fire," he said, "always the last refuge of the guilty." He stood, straightened his uniform, and turned toward the door. "Sister Weiss," he called. She appeared silently at the doorway. "Come with me," he said. No accusation, no handcuffs. Just that calm, courteous tone that frightened her more than shouting ever could. As they walked down the hall, every sound seemed amplified. The squeak of boots, the distant cough of a patient, the slow ticking of the wall clock. They stopped outside her quarters. Kruger opened the door, gestured for her to enter. On the desk lay a single sheet of paper, an official summons. "Berlin wants efficiency," he said quietly, "and I think you'll be very efficient, under closer supervision." Her blood ran cold. "I don't understand." He smiled. "You've been transferred to Ravensbrück." The air left her lungs. She had heard of that name, not as a hospital, but as a place where nurses went and never returned. Kruger adjusted his gloves. "You see, Sister Weiss, I always reward diligence, even when it hides something more interesting." He leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "And perhaps when you're there, you'll finally tell me the truth." Then he turned and left her standing in the doorway, the paper trembling in her hands. Outside, snow began to fall again, quiet, relentless, erasing footprints as it touched the ground. Inside, the nurse folded the summons neatly, set it on the desk, and stared at the candle burning beside it. Her reflection in the glass flickered, two versions of herself, one obedient, one defiant, and she no longer knew which one would survive. But somewhere deep down, beneath the fear, a thought emerged. If I'm being transferred, it means they haven't found everyone yet. Those she had saved, Camille the others, were still free, and that gave her strength. The train moved like a beast made of iron and breath, each wheel a heartbeat, each shudder a warning. Snow blurred the world beyond the slats, a streak of white and silence. Inside the sealed carriage, Sister Weiss sat between two guards, her wrists bound but her posture straight. She did not speak. Neither did they. The war had taught everyone the same thing. Silence was safer than truth. Ravensbrück lay north, beyond forests that swallowed sound. To the SS, it was a re-education center for women who had strayed from duty. But everyone in uniform knew its true name, whispered under breath. The camp of forgotten promises. The place where mercy was considered waste. When the train finally stopped, she stepped down into a wind sharp enough to draw tears. Ahead, a gate of black iron rose against the pale morning. The words Arbeit macht frei carved across its arch. She had seen those words before, in files, in reports. Now they stood above her like a sentence already written. A female officer barked orders. Names were checked, documents stamped. Weiss, now stripped of sister, was assigned to Block C, the medical division. Her duties: record-keeping, triage, sanitation. On paper, a nurse. In truth, a witness to things that no one should have to record. That night, she lay on the top bunk of a wooden frame, listening to the sounds of a place designed to erase identity. Footsteps, coughs, the clang of metal. Every noise seemed rehearsed, like the rhythm of a machine that never slept. Yet within that rhythm, she heard something unexpected, the low hum of a hymn, faint, almost broken. Someone in the next bunk whispered a prayer, not for survival, but for remembrance. Weiss closed her eyes and whispered the last line with her, a vow made in the dark. Days became indistinguishable. Each morning, the roll call stretched into hours, the snow falling soundlessly over boots and shoulders. The guards counted not people but bodies, and Weiss learned to move with the precision of someone invisible. But even invisibility had limits. In the infirmary, she recognized a face, hollowed, shivering, but unmistakable. Dr. Adler. He was sorting bandages when their eyes met. For a second, neither spoke. Then, with the smallest motion, he inclined his head. No greeting, no risk. Just confirmation that he too had been caught in the same storm. That evening, as they cleaned the treatment room, he spoke in a whisper that barely reached her. "They said you were gone," he murmured. "I am," she replied quietly. "Just not buried yet." Adler managed a faint smile, a ghost of who he once was. "There are others here," he said, "from the transports you altered. Some survived long enough to be reassigned." Her heart tightened. "Camille?" Adler hesitated. "I've heard his name once. The records say he's at Neuengamme, but no confirmation." She looked down at her hands, roughened, shaking slightly. "If he's alive, he's still part of the lie I wrote. That means it worked, at least once." He nodded. "And for that, you'll need to stay alive a little longer." Weeks passed. Ravensbrück became both her prison and her mission. She learned the routines, the guard shifts, the times when inspections grew lax. In the ledger room, she began to notice patterns, missing files, redacted names, entries marked unrecorded. The bureaucracy of cruelty was vast, but even vast systems had cracks, and within one of those cracks, she found an opportunity. A new transport was scheduled to arrive, women from occupied France, designated for medical work. Weiss saw the manifest. Among the names, one stood out, Clara Duval, age 27, resistance courier. The note beside her name read simply, "High value, special interrogation." Weiss knew what that meant. That night, she found Adler again, alone in the corridor. "They'll break her," she said. "You know what interrogation means here." He looked at her, weary but curious. "And what do you plan to do about it?" She glanced toward the ledger room. "The same thing I did before. Change the record." Adler frowned. "You can't falsify intake documents here. Every form is triple-checked." "Not all of them," she replied softly. The disinfection lists are handled by the sanitation clerk. She can barely read German. He hesitated. If they catch you. They won't, Weiss interrupted. They'll only notice when she's gone. Adler exhaled slowly, then said nothing more. He had learned long ago that arguing with her courage was like arguing with gravity. 2 nights later, Clara arrived, exhausted, half-conscious, her hair matted with snow. Weiss met her at the gate, pretending to verify her identification. Name? She asked in formal tone. Clara Duval. Weiss nodded, scribbling quickly on the clipboard, but what she wrote was not Duval. It was a new name, a new number, assigned to the medical sanitation unit. In a system that devoured paperwork faster than it processed lives, one line of ink could mean the difference between night and dawn. By morning, Clara Duval no longer existed in Ravensbrück's official registry. In her place was Marie Vogel, assigned to assist in linen disinfection. It was enough to buy time, a few days, perhaps a week. Time in that place was more valuable than oxygen. For 3 days, it worked. Weiss arranged extra rations for her under the guise of medical necessity. They exchanged few words, but in those rare moments, Clara's eyes burned with defiance. You're risking everything, she whispered one night. Why? Weiss looked at her, a face bruised but unbroken. Because you still believe in something. That's rarer than you think. Clara smiled faintly. Belief doesn't last long here. It lasts as long as someone remembers your name, Weiss replied. But the illusion began to crack. Kruger, the same captain who had arranged her transfer, had arrived in Ravensbrück for an inspection tour. His presence spread like frost across the camp. When Weiss saw him stepping out of the staff car, her heart stopped for a second. His uniform immaculate, his cane tapping rhythmically on the frozen ground. He looked unchanged, untouched by the months that had devoured everyone else. Their eyes met briefly across the yard. He smiled, that same thin smile that never reached his eyes. Frau Weiss, he said, voice smooth as glass. So efficient that even Berlin sent you here. She lowered her head. I serve where I'm assigned, Herr Hauptmann. I'm sure you do, he said softly. Efficiency always finds its proper place. He turned to the officer beside him. I'll be reviewing the medical logs this evening. I'm curious how this facility maintains such thorough records. The words struck like cold metal. Weiss felt her pulse in her throat. The records. He was coming for them again. That night, she moved faster than fear. She entered the ledger room under pretext of inventory, pulling Clara's falsified entry. She needed to hide it, or at least bury it under others. But before she could finish, the door opened. Kruger stood there, illuminated by the single bulb. I knew I'd find you here, he said, stepping inside. Always so dedicated. Weiss turned slowly, forcing calm. It's my duty, Herr Hauptmann. He moved closer, eyes drifting to the papers in her hand. Duty, he repeated. Such a useful word. It can hide anything, can it? For a long moment, neither moved. The silence hummed with electricity. Then Kruger reached out and took one of the ledgers from the table. He flipped it open casually, page after page of ink and names. You know, he said, the Reich values order above all else, but sometimes I wonder how much order can hide inside chaos. He closed the book gently. Tell me, Sister Weiss, or should I say, inmate Weiss, do you ever think of all the people you saved? She met his eyes. Every night. And do you think they remember you? Maybe not, she said softly, but they'll remember the chance they were given. Kruger's gaze sharpened, not with anger, but with curiosity, as if studying a specimen. Then he smiled. You're still defiant, even now. I admire that. He placed the ledger back on the table. Perhaps that's why you're still alive." He turned to leave, but before stepping out, he added, almost as an afterthought, "Tomorrow, there will be an inspection. You'll assist me personally. I'd like to see your efficiency up close." After he left, Weiss stood frozen. She knew what inspection meant. A review of records, prisoners, transfers. If he cross-checked the intake forms, he'd find Clara's false identity, and then both of them would vanish before dawn. She needed to act, but not alone. That night, she found Adler again. "He's coming tomorrow," she whispered. "He'll find her." Adler rubbed his eyes. "Then we hide her." "How?" "There's a transport leaving for a factory in Furstenberg. Medical personnel and sanitation staff. If she's on that list, she'll be gone before inspection." Weiss hesitated. "The list is sealed." "I still have the stamp," Adler said quietly. "You bought me that time months ago. Let me return it." They worked in silence. By dawn, Clara's name, under her alias, Marie Vogel, appeared among the outbound staff. It was a dangerous gamble. If anyone noticed the alteration before departure, all three would hang. At noon, the trucks lined up. Kruger stood at the gate, overseeing the inspection. His eyes swept over every group, sharp and methodical. Weiss held her breath as Clara, head down, stepped into the third truck. For a second, Kruger's gaze paused, perhaps instinct, perhaps memory, then moved on. "Proceed," he ordered. The engines rumbled to life. The trucks rolled out, disappearing into the whiteness. Only when the last one was gone did Weiss exhale. That evening, Kruger summoned her again. His tone was casual, his posture relaxed. But something in his eyes had changed. "Efficient as always," he said, pacing slowly. "The transport left on time. Records match perfectly." "Thank you, Herr Hauptmann." He smiled faintly. "And yet, I can't shake the feeling that I've seen one of those women before." Weiss froze. Kruger studied her face. "Strange, isn't it, how some faces linger in the mind, even when names change?" He let the silence stretch before adding, "Tell me, Sister Weiss, do you believe in coincidence?" She met his gaze. "I believe in detail." He chuckled softly. "Ah," the nurse's answer. Then he stepped closer, his voice low. "I know what you've done. Maybe not the how, but enough of the pattern. The question is, what should I do about it?" Weiss said nothing. Kruger leaned closer, almost whispering. "The war will end soon. You can feel it, can't you? The Reich is collapsing. And all of this, all these ledgers, uniforms, rules, will mean nothing. But what will remain is memory. You've chosen yours carefully. Perhaps I should do the same." He turned to leave. At the doorway, he said quietly, "One day, someone will ask how you survived. You can tell them you were lucky, or you can tell them that I let you." Then he was gone. For a long moment, Weiss stood motionless. Relief warred with suspicion. Was it mercy or manipulation? She never found out. 2 months later, as the Allies advanced from the west, Ravensbrück fell into chaos. Guards fled, records burned, prisoners wandered free, some too weak to believe it was real. When liberation came, the gates stood open, snow melting under the spring sun. Among the survivors, a nurse in a torn uniform walked out carrying nothing but a folded scrap of paper. The last page she had saved from the ledgers. On it were 3 names. One of them, written in her own hand, was Marie Vogel. She never saw Clara again, nor Adler, nor Kruger. But years later, when the world began to rebuild and historians came searching for the truth, they found something in the archives of Fürstenberg, a roster of workers transferred in early 1945. One name stood out, Marie Vogel. Status: survived. The snow had melted long ago, but somewhere in the world, One woman still remembered another's courage written in ink, and that was how a single nurse, inside the machinery of tyranny, turned paperwork into resistance, not with bullets, not with banners, but with silence, precision, and the quietest form of defiance, mercy. After the war ended, Europe became a continent of silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that hums after destruction, when the air itself seems to remember screams. Cities were half ruins, half monuments. Names turned to lists. People became testimonies. In one of the first tribunals assembled under a pale German sky, a woman stood among witnesses, her uniform long discarded, her hands still carrying the tremor of years spent in confinement. She no longer used her title, just Weiss. The word sister felt like something from another life. The courtroom was cold, a place built more for order than for truth. Faces behind desks, coats too clean, papers stacked in perfect symmetry, the new world trying to make sense of the old. Every morning she was called to speak. She would stand before them and describe things that did not belong to words. The sound of iron doors closing, the smell of disinfectant on winter air, the way light fractured through frost on barbed wire. The judges asked for clarity. She offered memory. But memory, she learned, was not precise. It bled, it echoed, it trembled. She spoke of lists, of numbers rewritten in haste, of names crossed out and replaced by others, of the thousands who passed through Ravensbrück, faceless to the system, yet fiercely alive in her recall. She did not mention the faces she could not bear to name. Some things, she decided, belonged to silence. When the records of the SS Medical Corps were read aloud, she recognized handwriting she once followed like a map, her own. Those careful strokes of ink had become evidence, a weapon used to undo the very structure they once disguised. In the ledgers, her falsifications were indistinguishable from official entries. To the tribunal, it was a puzzle. To her, it was a confession written in code. The prosecutors called her an accomplice to the system until they found the pattern hidden between the lines, names altered just enough to vanish from transports, whole pages missing from death manifests, notes labeled reassigned that led to living survivors. Her crime had become proof of her resistance. Still, the questions continued. Why had she stayed so long? Why not flee? Why serve within the machine? Weiss never answered directly. She simply said that someone had to stay inside to jam the gears, even if their own hands got crushed doing it. For weeks, the trial dragged on. The air in Nuremberg was filled with the scent of burnt paper and new ink. Each testimony was a weight added to the collective conscience of a continent. Some cried when they spoke. Others stared blankly, as if language itself had failed them. Weiss did neither. She simply told the truth as it had been written in the margins. When it was over, she was not punished nor celebrated. The new world had little space for shades of gray. Heroes and monsters were easier to record than those who had lived between the lines. She was cleared of wrongdoing, but there was no applause, only the scratch of pens recording her absolution. She left the courtroom quietly, stepping into a light rain that smelled faintly of soot. Around her, Europe was rebuilding itself one brick at a time. Streets where parades once marched were now lined with scaffolding. Children played on rubble, unafraid of ghosts. For the first time in years, no one gave her orders. Freedom, she discovered, could feel heavier than captivity. She moved south, first to Vienna, then to Geneva. For a time, she worked in a hospital near the lake, a quiet institution for war refugees. The corridors were clean, the air filled with the sound of water lapping against stone. Each morning, she prepared bandages with the same precision she once used to forge records. Healing and deception, she realized, demanded the same discipline. Both required faith in what could not be seen. The patients came and went. Some spoke of the front, others of lost homes, Lost borders, lost years. She rarely shared her own story. It belonged to a time no one wanted to revisit. But every so often, when a young nurse asked where she had learned her methods, Weiss would answer simply, in a place where errors were unforgivable. At night, she would walk down to the shore. The lake was glass smooth, reflecting the scattered lights of the city. Sometimes she imagined the ripples as names, each one moving outward, never disappearing, just blending into others until the water became a single, shimmering record of memory. Years passed. Letters began to arrive, from historians, journalists, survivors. They wanted details, verification, context. Most of all, they wanted confirmation that the woman called Marie Vogel had truly existed. She never answered those letters. Instead, she kept them stacked in a small wooden box, tied with string. To her, proof was not in paper. It was in the breath of those still living. Somewhere in the world, a woman named Clara, or Marie, had walked out of a camp and into her own future. That was all the confirmation she needed. Sometimes she dreamed of Kruger, always the same dream, the echo of his cane against concrete, the faint smell of tobacco, the measured tone of a man who mistook order for control. In the dream, he stood at a train platform, staring at her through the snow. She never heard what he said. The dream ended just before he spoke. Adler came to her mind less often, though his absence felt heavier. She had learned that he died during an evacuation march, trying to shield a patient from gunfire. The record listed him as missing in action. She corrected it silently every time she thought of him. Not missing, she would whisper to herself, simply remembered elsewhere. In the spring of 1958, a parcel arrived from Paris. Inside was a single photograph, a hospital ward, bright and sunlit. On the back, a handwritten line, for the nurse who changed my name. MV, no address, no return, just those initials. Weiss stared at them for a long time. The letters blurred slightly in the afternoon light, as if the paper itself breathed. She placed the photo beside the window, where the sun could reach it. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry. Not from sorrow, but from release. The tears were quiet, like the snow that used to fall outside Ravensbrück. The same snow that once covered the tracks. Leading north, the same snow that softened the sound of trains and boots. It had taken her a lifetime to understand that mercy leaves no monument, only echoes. By the time the 1960s arrived, Sister Weiss had become a ghost of her own legend. The newspapers called her the silent nurse of Ravensbrück, though she never confirmed the stories written about her. She avoided interviews, declined invitations, lived modestly in a small apartment overlooking the water. Her neighbors thought her a retired midwife. Only her hands betrayed the truth, steady, deliberate, shaped by years of holding both life and death in equal measure. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would open the old ledger she had kept, the one page she'd saved from the fire. The ink had faded, but the lines were still there. 3 names, written in careful script. Beneath them, an empty space where others could have been. She would trace the letters with her fingertip, feeling not guilt, but gratitude. Each line, she realized, was not a record of loss, but of defiance. A proof that even within a machinery built to erase, someone had dared to write the opposite. She would close the book gently, as if putting a child to sleep. The past, she thought, does not end. It just changes its temperature, from burning to glowing, from scream to whisper. When she died, quietly in her sleep, on a morning filled with sunlight, the nurse at her bedside found no family, no possessions of value, only the wooden box, the faded photograph, and a note that read, "Do not tell my story, tell theirs. And if you must write my name, write it small. so there's room for the others. The world remembered her anyway. Her testimony resurfaced in archives, her handwriting studied by scholars who called it the Code of Mercy. Decades later, a museum in Berlin displayed her ledger page under glass. Visitors stopped to read the names, unaware that the ink was made from stolen moments, forged between fear and faith. In the reflection of that glass, sometimes, the light catches faintly, as if from snow. And for a heartbeat, it feels as though the world itself remembers the sound of trains slowing, the rustle of paper, the steady hand of a nurse who chose to save rather than survive. The years have erased borders and uniforms, but not the lesson she left behind, that kindness, when placed against cruelty, does not vanish. It endures, quiet, uncelebrated, yet unbroken, like ink that refuses to fade, like snow that falls even after the guns have gone silent, like the memory of a name written once and saved forever.